Welcome to Smart Exports 2025, where we explore how Indian exporters thrive at intersection of trade policy, institutional support, and intelligent technology. The India's export story is evolving rapidly from $824 billion in the overall exports to ambitious targets again, but the path isn't straightforward. New tariffs, shifting supply chains, and increasing complex compliance requirements are reshaping how Indian businesses compete globally. Today, we have two leaders with us who are actively solving these challenges. Mr. Virat Bahri, Joint Director of Trade Promotion Council of India, where he's spearheading initiatives across agriculture, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, sectors that are both India's export strengths and most vulnerable to the regulatory shifts. And we have Mr. Naveen Atresh, founder and CEO of Liquidmind.AI, whose TradeVeda platform represents the new frontier of AI powered trade intelligence, helping exporters stay compliant while staying competitive. So let's dive into India's current export reality. Now, for the first, let's set up the context as in what the market overview and the tariff disruption is going on. To Mr. Virat, sir, how are Indian exporters are navigating some choppy waters, shifting USA to China trade dynamics, new tariff structures, supply chain realignment post COVID? From your experience in working along with the exporters across different sectors, what is the current state of play for the Indian exporters, you would say?
See, when you are discussing the state of play for Indian exporters, there are two aspects of the question. One is, it is very important to understand how our government is looking at this current situation and how it is adapting, because that has become suddenly very critical because from an environment which was reasonably, I mean, WTO was not working as a very strong policy instrument because of the lack of consensus across countries, but it was still working. There was a multilateral framework in place, and there were some basic set of rules which were being recognized. But now, with the recent imposition of tariffs by the US under the President Donald Trump, uh, there is suddenly a lot of unpredictability, volatility, and it has become very important for governments to act fast. And that is why the kind of pace we used to normally see, things like FTAs, free trade agreements. A lot of them were not happening for us for quite almost a decade. And then recently, India on its own accord started accelerating its engagement and entering into FTAs for the past 2 3 years in particular. But now, post this announcement by Trump, I think there is a greater, need and urgency of countries other than India, also from across the world, to explore integration with each other, considering that the US market may face challenges in the coming years. That's one aspect of the strategy. And the second aspect, of course, is not that the US is being ignored. The US has its own priority in the sense that it wants to reduce its trade deficit, and therefore India is also on a fast track to negotiating a quick kind of a deal with the US, where we can address some of their concerns, increase our purchases of some products, and maybe bring down duties that, like we did for motorcycles and bourbon whiskey. So I think the government role, therefore, is very important at this stage, because in the international scenario, even a very small difference in tariffs can mean a lot in terms of your competitiveness, right? So that is
Right.
the first aspect. As far as exporters are concerned, definitely, they are facing a lot of issues with buyers, and therefore they really have to manage the situation. And we are pretty hopeful that that both governments will be able to negotiate something and avoid that deadline of 90 days, where a tariff imposition happens, or I mean the reciprocal tariff happens. So we are pretty confident that situation won't come. But in the current scenario, what they would be doing, if that is the question, then it would be more like having constant communication with the buyers and trying to mitigate their concerns, trying to use something like a price escalation clause, doing advanced shipments, of course, is the most common thing which they are trying to do, so that they do not face that window kind of a situation. And of course, a very interesting strategy which comes to mind in this regard is D2C, which is suddenly growing at a very rapid pace, which means that when you are going direct to consumer, and if you have a genuinely premium product which the customers want, and you're able to market it successfully, then perhaps a little difference in price, you may have a better cushion when you're going direct to the consumer. It's not like you can make that shift immediately, but if we are talking about long term things, I think this is one strategy which companies can adopt. And second strategy, of course, is to diversify, because definitely we spend a lot of years depending heavily on the US market. I think in most of our categories it's among our top export markets. So even as we maintain that relationship, it is not healthy to have too much concentration of our exports on one market. So I think that is something which should change going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a really good comprehensive view, sir. Yeah. So now let's get certain a little bit of a more sector specific. Let's say agriculture, pharma, and chemicals, textiles are core to the India's export basket, but they are also most regulation heavy. So how are these sectors specifically absorbing the recent tariff shocks, or how are they evolving in the EU compliance requirements?
It's not something which I have directly engaged with for the sectors, whether how they are basically doing it. But I mean, seriously, it's not something which we have done, so we can omit this.
Understandable, sir. Okay, moving on. Sir, Naveen, sir, as Virat sir has explained about the comprehensive view of the landscape, in case of this complex, fast-changing regulatory environment that he has described, this is the kind of chaos AI should be solving. How does TradeVeda, your application, help exporters not just survive these disruptions but actually turn them into competitive advantages?
Yeah, thank you, Usha and Virat. A pleasure to, as always, interact with you. And thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. At the outset, Usha, it's a multi. I think Virat summarized all the key points that the world economy pretty much was going chugging along. Let's put it that way, right? Uh, International trade is a $30 trillion plus market, especially focused on myriad categories, different regulations, various countries coming to the fore, very, very different frameworks in each, multilateral agreements, an umbrella body called the World Trade Organization governing it. All of these Virat has already highlighted. If you were to take a exporter slash a trader view and work backwards and say where is it that new age technology companies like ours can come in and try and add value. um, I think the common areas that are very low hanging fruits are typically around two three buckets. The first bucket that I would classify, which Virat also highlighted, is this whole uncertainty around, large part of the world, believe it or not, till 3 years ago, Virat will agree with me, didn't even know or had not heard much about tariffs or trade till Trump came in and created this tsunami, right? For good or for bad. Obviously, like Virat highlighted, he has his Make America Great Again mandate, as we do with Make India Great Again, and focus on making India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. And we are striving towards that. Our DGFT's goal is very clear, $3 trillion by 2030. I was there in the SCOMET conference in January this year. They made it very clear. So if you were to take that view, right, um, there is a huge impetus, especially with the recent defense deals and the increased focus, if you will, staying away from geopolitics. there has been a huge spike in perhaps demand for Indian defense equipment, etc. So obviously that clearly falls under SCOMET. Similarly, there are massive categories that Virat already highlighted. For a long time, India was an agrarian economy, right? So if you were to look at food exports in many areas and spices, we are still one of the world's largest exporters, if not the largest exporter for a lot of those commodities. And then you were to take, let us say, consumer electronics, we have a massive spike, thanks to the bellwethers like Apple coming in and setting up shop, and forget the 20% additional tariff that Trump can impose on Apple. That will still be way more profitable for Apple to make in India and go export to America. That's just the law of economics and finance at play. That apart, if you were to take this, my top six categories: food, pharma, consumer electronics, chemicals, defense, industrial goods, engineering, and so on, you will observe one common pattern that they're all kind of struggling with, which is really largely around compliance, regulations, staying abreast of what is the latest and greatest norms that some country that they have to export to has as requirements in terms of regulatory construct, some compliance framework changing overnight, DGFT being made aware of it, that going over to ice gate at the port of at the time when they're ready to ship those items from an exporter's perspective through their CHAs. And one of the common things that we can look at from a new age technology company's perspective, therefore, is compliance, regulatory aspects, making sure that the documentation pain points, which are numero uno, a large part of trade today, even today, with great improvements in digitization, websites, Virat will agree with me, every one of our top categories, apparel, pharma, food, they all have websites, they all have beautiful document processing capabilities. And we need that one single platform that Madam Honorable Finance Minister, Madam Sitaraman, announced in February in the budget, which is what they call as Bharat Trade Net. And the goal there was to unify and create a sort of a UPI moment, if you will, for our world of trade. And if you were to take that, plugging in into that ecosystem, or what our honorable Prime Minister, when last year he visited Singapore and tried to bring in best practices from platforms like Trade Trust and so on, it's all about, at the end of the day, same logic, right? At the end of the day, what does an exporter importer's primary problem? What is that? Buyers don't trust sellers, sellers don't trust buyers. How are you going to solve that conundrum? Right now, here it's just replace buyer with importer and seller with exporter. Could be exporter or trader for the most part. So you're going to deal with these categories. You're going to deal with these personas, and you're going to deal with workflow automation, documentation constructs, very very low hanging fruits for technology to come in and create sizable impact. I'm not even saying meaningful impact, sizable impact. And what will that do? Largely, even if you were to position it as a copilot construct or a capability, there is a huge improvement in time motion capability, productivity, their time being spent in better constructs, and so on. And it is a very, very vast space, as we are discovering in the enterprises, the large ones that we are working with. Primarily, our focus is large enterprises and medium enterprises. The very large ones almost always come back with the same pattern: adherence of documentation to critical to quality parameters, accuracy being a certain percentage, um, constructs around trying to interlink and smoothen the automate. So Liquidmind's mandate is automate workflows for international trade using AI. So we are staying true to that vision and trying to execute on triage of these categories and seeing where can we create meaningful and maximum impact. That's kind of how we are looking at the problem. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I just want to push on this AI angle a little bit more. We hear a lot about AI in trade, like you have mentioned, but this was a theoretical journey. So, now can you give me a concrete example? So, let's say there is an exporter that wakes up tomorrow and finds new EU chemical regulations. How does your platform make their Tuesday morning easier?
Good question. Um, So if you were to look at the Liquid Mind product suite, right, we have a few core products. Our flagship product, as you already highlighted, is called TradeVeda, which is really solving the compliance and the regulatory construct and the problem. extraction of the documentation, because there's a lot of time filled, whether it's paper filling or even digitization, making mistakes, it gets rejected. Let's take a example of a letter of credit. Exporter fills in something, submits it to their bank, gets rejected, comes back. Obviously, in larger enterprises, you have entire teams doing this. However, there is a certain amount of workload given the amount of documents they have to process, given the scale of their shipments is larger, and therefore there is room for errors and so on. So that's the TradeVeda product. Now it also not just flags and shows inconsistencies, but also recommends what or even autocorrects and shows up critical to quality parameters and adheres to the same using AI. Now, the other part to answer your question of how do we make somebody's a typical day in the life of an exporter or a trader easy on that Tuesday. Perhaps the best example I can tell you with changing regulatory requirements in the EU framework, as you highlighted, is probably an example of a product that we have in our product suite called Patram AI. Patram is largely about trying to be able to interact with documents that you are gleaning from across all of these highly resourceful assets and resources that we have at our fingertips. So do the exporters. I'm not saying they don't have it today. They have DGFT, they have RTPCI, they have the Apparel Export Promotion Council, they have the Food Promotion Council, they have Tirupur Cotton Promotion Council, they have the Northeast for say Darjeeling tea, and so there's so many of them, right? So name it, and you have so many promotion councils. But TPCI is one of the biggest there, right? If not the biggest. Question is not about just having access to the documentation for an exporter or trader at their fingertips, but it's about making it actionable and making it insightful. Patram solves that problem. So, what in your EU context, let's say EU, let's say a typical regulation changes for, say, a food consignment, let's say for spice trade, and they suddenly change some law that says, this has to also adhere to this guideline, and you need to make your exporter aware that now suddenly this target geography that they're trying to export to has this delta of the 3 or 10 additional critical to quality parameters or consignment checklist, if you will. You have to go visit their local hyperlocal office or talk to your regional export promotion council for that category, in this case food. We will reach out. We'll probably get a lot of help from TPCI. We'll get a lot of help from DGFT. Look up the latest handbook that DGFT has. Is that in sync? Because IceGate's also plugged in. IceGate is at the port of, it's a customs portal. So they all have to finally go through that. So it's the customs at exports, but what about the import customs? Because as you saw in or heard in the recent mango shipment example to the United States, what happened is, just to keep it short, basically India had a huge, one of our exporters had a huge shipment that went over all the way to the US. There was a little bit of a documentation glitch in a certain parameter, and basically that code mismatch entailed that shipment was rejected at port of entry. So the United States almost crores together, double-digit crores, close to 10 crores or so on, basically got rejected in the Los Angeles port. Now, what you don't want that to happen, obviously, right? This is not about changing requirement, but it's just about stringency on what is must-have, what is good to have, and what is that criteria going to look like, and is it an ever-changing field, given you're changing and exporting to so many countries, and you have to be abreast of the latest laws of that plan. So Patram basically gives you that instant access, queryable multimodality, which is text, image, or chart, where you can just go query that document that you pull from DGFT or you pull from, our latest trade promotion council portals, and you are able to suddenly put that power into the hands of the fingertips of your exporters or traders, much like how a GPT would do. That's basically a multimodal capability that we have, which is called Patram, and it's incredibly valuable, as some of our users in their early feedback and beta trials are telling us. Hope that answers, but that's how I'd like to make their life easier on that Tuesday. Hopefully, Monday they hear the scary news, they suddenly go to Patram, they query it, and they realize, okay, these are the three deltas I need to do. I need to quickly go look up the local agency of that country, in this case EU, or that union, get the required office for, say, that category or that commodity, make sure that you make the required changes, come back, cycle back with your team, make the changes, put that into your documentation, because a large part of, remember, export consignments is about documentation flow leading to fund flow, leading to goods flow. So you have to solve that problem. Otherwise, it's going to get stuck. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That is a really good understanding of what Liquid Mind is offering to us. Moving on, Virat, sir, so you have worked extensively with trade promotion and export facilitation, that is, creating country specific outreach, making trade dialogues, and buying and having seller buyer platforms for easy understanding. But I'm curious about the execution gaps that you have observed in your journey. So, organizations can facilitate introductions and market access, but where do you see that the exporters are struggling once they actually execute into these opportunities that you are trying to create?
Right. Yes. Actually, first of all, I would like to mention, because when you talked about ChatGPT, the way everybody uses it, but this is the kind of application which Naveen mentioned that AI should actually have, because of the huge kind of information gap in international markets. When can you get that information in real time, as you mentioned, and the fact that the information is scattered, it's, you don't even know where to source what. So if that kind of thing is available and a trusted tool is available, there's certainly nothing like it. Coming to your question, yes, the very purpose of the activities which we do is basically that, if you are sitting in India and you want to, either start exports or, expand your exports to a certain market, or even to, reconnect or build new networks within your existing markets. So this is the kind of platforms which we do are kind of aggregator platforms that, a number of buyers and a number of sellers come together in one place. We do that kind of arrangement. We do that kind of matchmaking. We take the help of various stakeholders, be it our own government ministries, be it the embassies in these specific market, ours and theirs. They are both, very supportive. Mostly, that's a blessing. And the trade promotion bodies in other markets, they help us. We help them. We have MOUs with a lot of them. So the idea is that you are in a space with them for a day or two. You have trusted buyers who have been come recommended, who are coming through some councils, and therefore you have a better chance of, doing business. Or even if you're not doing business, you get to learn a lot about that particular market. You make connections. If X is not your immediate buyer, he may be able to connect you to Y. So lots of such benefits can happen. Of course, practical challenges can be of various kinds. One is that you are not in the kind of regulated market. There are certain markets which are not as regulated, so you don't have those kind of trustworthy relationships which you can build. So even if with the best intention you're getting the right kind of players, but some or the other unethical practice may happen. There is a risk of shifting policies. Any market can anytime change a certain policy related to its imports for any reason. We observe this in the case of MRLs because we work in the food sector. So sometimes, a market may just say that, this much level of residue, we are allowing, but now they say that we will only allow if the residue of pesticide is 1/1000th of this. But there is no logic. Normally it's like, they have followed some kind of, maybe they are following the EU norms, or it's just a perception. They're not a lot of times these MRLs are not scientifically also backed. So those kind of things can catch exporters unawares. Shipment delays, of course, the traditional. I mean, post COVID, there was a lot of problem with the availability of containers. The Red Sea crisis stopped ships for many days at a stretch. So these are the typical execution challenges. Of course, you have to understand the right way of doing business. You don't. I mean, things like these still happen, that you take an, you give an advance payment and the exporter is unable to supply for some reason. So I think, yes, these are the practical challenges. Quality. issues may be faced. Sometimes the buyer may not accept the kind of quality which was initially committed, and he may then refuse the order, or he may back out. So I think these are the typical challenges. Yes, and you, as you mentioned, non-awareness of compliance, or the real-time information is not available, which you said it's a real challenge. I totally agree with that. Real-time information in today's environment is particularly very important, because it's suddenly become very, very different. Even you have an agreement with a certain market, and still, countries are, probably we may have that unfortunate trend that countries may just change their rules at the split second for some reason. So that
Yeah.
could be something which we need to address. Yes.
Okay, that is interesting. So Naveen sir, as Virat sir has explained, these are the gaps that he has observed between the market access and the operational execution. So, do you think this is where the technology has to step in? If yes, how does Liquid Mind operate with this at a granular level?
Yeah, that's a great question again, right? And I think I completely concur with Virat's points on whether it is market access, suddenly having to deal with the MRL, the maximum residue limits that he highlighted in the pesticide, the residue levels, etc., in food products, coming as the biggest big concern, right? If that residue level is above a certain amount, they could just reject it at the port of entry again. It could become a repeat of that mango case for a very different reason because product was not right in their eyes
Right.
at least. And we have seen a few instances even in Virat and I were chatting about this last year. I remember back in April, where we were chatting about that whole MDH spice Singapore related incident. These happen, right? Sporadically, you keep reading about this in the papers, and obviously, Virat is on. Literally, this is their day in the life, right? So they get to hear suddenly some XYZ consignment gets rejected. And these are big players, right? These are not small players from within our space. Now, anyway, to come back to your question, how would I look at it? What is that gap in market access and sort of execution constructs that AI can play a role or solve for it? Number one, we need to sort of remember. I'll give you a case, and this is not even India specific, but I'll still highlight this, right? You look at the
Yes.
recent NVIDIA chip export for DeepSeek jumped to the fray as a large language model, a very low cost one for very great reasons. A very well done one, by the way. I'm a big fan of it. Back on 27th of January this year, that one day that they launched on 20th, but they brought it to general availability on 27th. That night, basically US daytime, the US stock market crashed by $1 trillion. And Nvidia stock alone got hit by, I think, over $600 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And Nvidia is a poster child of AI. They sell a lot of the H100 chips and the advanced GPUs to a large uh, percentage of the world, especially, let's say, within continental US, obviously. And I think 18% or so to Singapore, which happens to be a free trade zone in this particular case that I am talking about. And what happened is that typically there was this thing where there was this company in Singapore that actually is being looked into, where where because it's a free trade zone, the last mile, even though the termination point 18, I mean it's crazy, right? So Singapore is, just to give you a perspective, it's an economy and it's a country which is a city state. It's an island, and it's a little bigger than a little, perhaps even smaller than Bangalore city, just for perspective, Bengaluru city. And the population is about 7-8 mil, depending on who you speak to. Bangalore, in comparison, is about 11-12 million. And Singapore commands, as a free trade zone, obviously, 18% of NVIDIA's total exports for that calendar year gone by. And then people started double clicking. They figured it out that, oh, there's some company there which was sort of, even though the termination point was Singapore and then being sent over, let's say, to other countries. In this case, it made its way into, at least the allegations. God knows whether it's proven or not. Don't hold me to it. But largely, at least, there were allegations in the media that we all read where there's some diversion via Malaysia into China, and DeepSeek didn't really power their systems with just that 6 mil models, but it was a lot costlier than that. God knows what that amount is. But this is all speculation. What I mean is documentation constructs, figuring out if players in artificial intelligence or deploying technologies that track world trade and documentation and workflow challenges in very complicated scenarios like this, whether it's Dubai or Singapore in the free trade zone analogy, or countries with whom we have free trade agreements, which is a lot easier. Uh, India, UK just signed one right recently, so that gives you good market access both ways, and you can. And I'll give you one more perspective. Go to pharma. You all remember we were all struggling with during the Covishield raw materials use case in 2021-22, where there was a huge glut in raw materials to be supplied to India for Serum Institute of India based in Pune. Adar Punawara was literally begging the US to say, can you please ensure that this raw material comes, the filters and some of the other essential compounds to make Covishield the vaccine, which was a lifesaver for many of our people, right? Elders and youngsters alike. And it did get delayed because they had export controls in place for their sensitive chemicals. They have the analogy of SCOMET in their country as well. So obviously they kind of regulated that exports. And it took some time to reach. Now think about this. This is life saving, right? So what I mean is different markets. Why I give you these two flavors is one is from them exporting and the other way in a very different category. One pharma and one, let's say, chipsets and consumer electronics and the hardware powering your brains for AI and so on. Um, it is very important that companies not just look at problem statements in isolation, but they look at entire business processes, workflow automation, and not just solve for very narrow AI agent. So I'll give you this example, right? You could have an AI agent that solves for documentation constructs similar to the CTQ, accuracy, blah blah blah, for a large enterprise who's also an exporter and a trader and whatever, right? $1 billion plus enterprise also doesn't matter, or an SMB, medium business, whatever, from India into some other country or multi countries. And you're solving that conundrum. That's one AI agent. Think of this as an analogy. And AI agent will probably get to it, I know, in a bit, but largely this is like a gist of it, right? And then you have to also look at agentic workflows, which is AI agents speaking to each other, taking an instruction and running with it. So you're going to have to connect the dots and look at it, not look at it in isolation, and being able to see how can technology truly be solving problems, very large industry and complex problems. By the way, these are, just to give you a perspective, international trade is not new. It's centuries together, and that's been the bedrock of how we all did dhanda. India was, believe it or not, up until the 1500s, 15 1600s perhaps early, we were the world's largest exporter along with China. 25% is what our share of world trade was, India's. And today it is sub 4% or so, depending on again who you speak to. But we can get there. And that goal of DGFT, China, for example, does what? 3.5, 4 trillion per year today. 3 trillion is our goal for, say, 2030, not too long into the future. Right? It's very achievable, by the way, especially with the spike in defense exports and etc. And even consumer electronics. What I mean is, you need to be able to take that macrocosmic view, double click, zoom in, figure out where your technology can truly create needle moving, not just do tech for tech's sake. There's a lot of companies that have this urge and temptation to go to, let's say, Virat and his team, or exporters in various big companies and SMBs, and say, I have this cool tech solution which uses AI, does some extraction, not having a damn clue कि करता क्या है, value क्या है customer के लिए, how will it help the exporter, where is it in the state transition across the various workflows within or outside the enterprise in the ecosystem, if you will, adhering to the right Incoterms, making sure that pata naga ki, not the liability suddenly not on the exporter, like Virat highlighted, uh, advance payments, importer honoring their balance payment, let's say, right? There's a lot of things that happen in the SMB space where oftentimes people even bypass LC, letter of credit route, and do advance payments, 50 अभी 50 बाद में जब आइटम आ जाएगा, पता लगा 50 आ गया, exporter बेचता ही नहीं, doesn't send, doesn't ship, then what happens, right? 50% of the money is already received with the exporter. So you deal with all these very very, and or otherwise somebody, I've heard of people from within leading industrial estate, and in interest of confidentiality of them, I will not name them, but largely very top exporter here in amongst the engineering goods sector that I was speaking to 4 5 months ago told me they exported a certain item, and that item basically letter of credit was honored, but despite that, they didn't manage to get it. The importer balked at the last second. So it's how is it possible? It's actually legal tender. Letter of credit is agreement between banks of the exporter and the importer. So you're going to be able to look at technology, double clicking on all these, looking at the workflows, making sure that all these automation systems, etc., are in place, and looking at it holistically and not very, very myopic. That's my suggestion. And I think there is a huge opportunity there.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Now let's move on to 2025 strategic initiatives. So, Virat, sir, you have been involved in organizing major trade initiatives with respect to India, events like Indus Food, International BSMs, pavilions at global expos like Coverings Orlando and Vita Foods in Barcelona. So, from your experience, how are these strategic platforms helping specifically medium to large exporters, particularly in food and spices, navigate the dual challenge of finding new markets but still staying compliant and be in up to date with the evolving regulations?
Right. See, compliance is not something we work
Uh,
on specifically, but I can tell
Sir,
you about.
sorry, but you are on mute. Just stop for
No,
a
I think
second.
I unmuted. Just
No, I can hear you, Virat. Please go ahead. I can hear you.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, Virat, I was able to
Can you
hear
hear me
you.
now? Okay. So I'm saying that we are not specifically into compliances, but the core benefit we are offering in this supply in this export ecosystem is, as I said, a buyer connect. And in this, I'll give you specifically the example of Indus Food. So Indus Food started around 2017 or 18 roughly, and the discussion at that time was happening around the agri export policy and doubling farmer incomes. That was an objective which the government expressed. And the major concern was that, how do you diversify this agri export base? There are a lot of big brands which are exporting, but India has such a huge agri, raw material base, and therefore a lot of untapped potential. There is scope for a lot of companies to export, but they have to go to some of these big global trade fairs, and these global trade fairs are expensive, and they are one amongst many countries which are exhibiting, so they do not get the necessary kind of attention. So we in Indus Food, we aim to create a platform, one which is within India, so therefore much less expensive, easier to access for them. And in India, we created that kind of ecosystem where buyers from over 100 countries today are coming to visit this show in Greater Noida. So they are getting that kind of access without having to cross the border, right? Then we did something unique in the sense we made it an exclusive B2B show, which means that there is no general public which is allowed. So people found value in the fact that they get exclusive time and return for their investment. They get to meet buyers. So the idea is just to build the platform, give it, organize the right kind of engagement activities within those 3 days. Make it, it's such a high energy environment. If sometime you visit in this food, you will understand the kind of energy it has. And then when they discuss with each other, they talk about challenges. A buyer expresses an interest in the product. These are all genuine buyers, verified buyers. Then they will give you all kinds of information, which is especially useful for the new brands. And over the years, I have seen that when such a platform is created, new and innovative companies start coming up. So there are, a healthy mix of big brands and emerging startups. A lot of things are happening, for instance, in the RTE space now, the ready to eat space. Because now our cooked meals are going abroad, and our own population is of course interested. Our NRI population is a major consumer, but definitely there is scope that there are, even the native populations of those countries are trying out these things, getting exposed to Indian cuisine. So I think it's a journey which cannot be traversed overnight. I think you can do some events and then leave it. Let's say the ecosystem will develop. Ecosystem develops over time, right? But I think within a period of 8 to 9 years, we see a definite traction in these things. In this particular sector, we see that the show has been growing regularly, and exporters find value in it. They keep coming back, so we have repeat business as well as new exporters coming in, new buyers coming in. Therefore, if a platform gives you that kind of a space, it is self-propagating and it grows on its own. And I think it was something which the food industry really accepted as what they were looking for, right? So I think that's how it is. You have to build upon, develop the right kind of ideas, develop a strategy, and to be at it for a consistent period of time for something to change. Because we keep saying, China plus one, China plus one, but a China plus one cannot happen just one day you impose heavy tariffs on China and the supply chain gets realigned. It doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
It takes years to build, and therefore that's not even a sustainable way to go about it. Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, Naveen, sir, hearing about these TPCI active programs, let's think about scale. So, we have hundreds of companies at these trade shows, thousands of potential connections. So, let us think of a scenario: a company that is participating in an international F&B trade mission. Uh, Makes new connections and wants to enter into Southeast Asian markets, let's say. How does your platform support this transition from a trade show that leads to an actual shipments?
It's a great question, something that's very dear to me. And I'll give you a little bit, I'll take a step back and give you a little bit of a perspective on this topic. Virat, you nailed it. The Indus Greater Noida Food Expo. You should see the energy, the vibrancy, the kind of product portfolio, the gamut of categories that they cover under the food space. It's anything and everything. And these are massive halls. Okay, there is a reason why they peter it down also to B2B. Now I'll give you another flavor, right? There is a similar experiment right from the inaugural edition of Aero India and Defense Exports as an example, which happens here in my backyard. I live in Yelahanka, Newtown, and next to the Yelahanka Air Base, and it's pretty much, my father was in the Indian Air Force, so we used to just go. It was in those days we used to get passes, Virat. So 1996, 94 onwards, that was the first iteration, although they say it started in 95, 96. But Aero India runs every 2 years. That's the cadence. And it's again B2B. The first 4 days are for B2B. So that you hear about all these, right? Sukhoi 57, F-35s, all the things that are tabled right now for discussion for us to import um, from, let's say, most likely whatever, right, the usual suspects. We saw these equipment in action, ditto with this food fairs, right, taking again going medici effects, so pardon me. Largely I'm just trying to compare across industries and giving you the pattern, and I'm trying to tell you how ease of market access and also technology again can help connect all these dots, if you will, across sectors. I'm trying to give you that flavor. Food Expo, Indus, Greater Noida, great example. I had the good fortune of visiting the Indonesian Jakarta International Food Fair back in 22. Oh my God, mind blowing. An entire complex. You should see that trade expo. Almost about massive 6, 7 pavilions filled with different variety of consumer goods, business goods. Obviously, it was also D2C and B2B. But you should see that energy, enthusiasm, largest players on the planet. Let's say Sinarmas, which is one of Indonesia's greatest, largest paper exporter worldwide, by the way, based in the Kalimantan island. They were there. I met the person actually, a person from PNG in his past experience and later working with Sinarmas. And some of the other big food expo players and the associations like RTPCI, Apparel Export, and so on, and Food Promotion Council, and so on, who were present there, by the way, for the Indonesian flavor. You can not only get access, see, it's a two-way street. Just as you want to export, you also want to be able to import in necessary. That's the reason FTAs exist, right? Free trade agreement. So you want to be able to do business meaningfully, profitably, reduce your trade deficit. What's that goal, right? For XYZ category. So it was phenomenal in not just looking at the breadth of the market access from the Southeast Asian perspective that you took across categories in the examples I gave, the flavor that Virat touched upon, which is the scale, the energy, the vibrancy, the breadth of product portfolio that exists. Um, the fact that it is running so massively in India, and trust me, you can ask Virat, the CAGR in the user footfalls, etc., there, compounded growth rate of people, the transactions being done at a B2B level, and obviously in this case B2B, is going to be greater double digits every year that we run that because these are massively see food products, B2B scale or otherwise. These are all large markets. Perhaps we are the largest in many of the categories under commodities trading, etc., and some of the spices exports, the coffee exports, and so on. So what I mean is, net net, while you learn the nuances of participating from and the takeaways that we as exporters or traders, if I put myself in their place and solve for documentation or workflow constructs and making sure that they're able to go export that meaningfully, like you said, the conversion to that actual export, if you will, or the conversion to an actual import of some raw material that will help you build on your base and export more. Both ways, it just eases that friction, builds connections, gets you the required market access where you can then deploy technology meaningfully, solve for their problems to make it friction free, and make the whole process seamless. That's, in my view, how I would look at it. And like I said, my it was an eye opener for me in the Jakarta food fair, the Greater Noida Food Fair of Indus that happens annually. These are events. These are Aero India. These are events in very different, in similar categories in the food space. But it's, by the way, food doesn't mean just khana. It's everything that touches food processing, massive industrial grade to cups, that saucers, custom white label, massive equipment to the tiniest niche art. Anything and everything that you can think of are there in our indus fairs or in this example of these two large markets in South Asia. I'm not touching on Southeast Asia, but quite literally South Asia, which is India in this example, and Indonesia in the other example that I gave. So it's both ways. It's pretty beneficial.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So let's just deep dive into more into digital transformation in terms of trade. Okay, so Naveen sir, I want to get technical for a moment. So everyone talks about automation in trade nowadays, but you are specifically mentioning Liquid Mind as agentic AI. So that is a, I would say, a very unique distinction. So, what's the difference, and why should a exporter be who is dealing with, let's say, thousands of shipments, consider about that difference?
Yeah, great question again, right? Application of technology solving real world problems. Let's put it that way, right? I already touched upon a few of these, so I won't rhetorically repeat them, but I'll give you the view, right? What is, first of all, take a step back and look at two big trends in the AI space, machine learning space, which is what we call as AI agents. It is predicted that by 2035, there will be close to hundreds, if not of billions, if not trillions, of AI agents ruling our world. And what are AI agents? At the simplistic first principles level, it takes an instruction, a prompt, if you will, detailed, as detailed as you can get, runs with it in a depth manner, solving for a verticalized problem space, whatever it may be. In our case of, let us say, exports, as an example, it could be documentation exports and looking at, adhering to CTP quality parameters, mapping it to the various documents, making sure that accuracy levels are high, and then being able to make sure it have meaning and reducing the output of that to the required corporate, whether you want to be or SMB or large. That's one view. Now you could, like I said earlier as well in the example, connect workflows to be able to, let's say, plug in into different portals, different use cases, different constructs, trying to say how can I connect the disparate systems together. Right? That's another view of how one looks at the entire AI agent to agentic AI use case. And then you suddenly saying, okay, so now in this world of agentic AI, I'm going to be able to get agent running documentation, AI agent solving for, let's say, in the chemical industry, one of the companies that we are working with, where they're basically looking up health checks, parameters, auto alert system. So again, you take an instruction, run with it for that machine health check, if you will, and constructs around the same, and then being able to make sense of that. Now you connect the two depth AI agent capabilities to solve workflow problems. There could be others where you're now suddenly saying, I want to be able to activate logistics providers, my CHS, logistics agents, and so on, and being able to connect the dots and build meaningful workflows. If you now stitch all of these AI agents together and run with an instruction autonomously like a full self-driving car could do, essentially, let's say Tesla in the US or uh, the Google series of Waymo taxis and so on. It is in such hands that this is what agentic AI can do for you. Just let's say coding assistants. You just give an instruction and it will generate code for you. You don't need to know coding to be a programmer or software engineer. Similarly, in our world of trade, you could have these multiple AI agents speak to each other, solve for workflow constructs, be able to produce value to the end customer. And that basically creates what we call as this whole concept of agentic AI. And by the way, we argue as AI practitioners that in a true agentic AI world, SaaS, software as a service, is dead. Because no longer are you charging your customers for, let us say, per seat pricing and so on. You're charging for outcome. You're charging for actual usage. You're charging for the value that you get. And AI doesn't even come close. That's one perspective I put in.
इसके दो पेपर ध्यान से देखिए एक तो ये पेपर है यहाँ दिक्कत एक ये पेपर है और एक
Well, actually, I'm not a person who's too much into the technical side of it, but I can just think of some questions or some ideas which AI could, definitely help. As I earlier mentioned, it is very key to resolve the real-time information gap which people face. I also met another company representative who was talking about labeling, for instance, in food products, which is a very nuanced thing. Market to market, product to product, the labeling requirements are so different. So, for an exporter who doesn't have the support of AI, something like labeling can be very difficult to comprehend. When which market he's entering, so what the requirements are, and if he goes wrong, then that could prove to be very expensive. Then obviously, how do you manage and meet regulatory standards? How do you integrate and monitor your whole supply chain? Because in a sector like food, it's not just the importing country regulations. When you're talking about pesticides, they are coming from the farm level, so that entire control on your supply chain is so important in food, because food is something where countries will obviously be very sensitive about. And often at time when you think that it's a compliance mismatch, or there's been a higher level of MRL, it's not necessarily the exporter's fault. The exporter himself doesn't know where it came from. I've heard of
Right.
cases where even organic, so-called organic food products may have some elements of pesticide, or something like, let's say, there's a factory in the vicinity and something gets into the soil and that gets into your crop. So even an organic product cannot necessarily. So that control over your supply chain is important. If AI can be trusted and can bring those kind of credible products which can reduce your errors, enhance your creative credibility, shorten your approval cycles, sectors like food processing, pharma, and textiles can benefit in these future areas like ESG reporting, which is being required by importing markets today. And you can therefore be proactive and be ahead of upcoming trade norms rather than always having to follow and play. Maybe
Hmm.
have a bad experience and then learn. It's better to be able to preempt something that's happening in the international market and be prepared for it in advance. So I think that should be the next level of AI, that even you're prepared for the future. And I don't know if possible tomorrow AI could help you get a better and deeper insight into the markets you are serving, because that is also very important to understand what your marketing and approach needs to be to, in the market you're targeting, because what are the customer tastes and preferences, and what are the kind of competitors you have. So these kind of questions, I think, also probably AI may be able to answer and bring that kind of information to you sometime in the future.
Perfect. Thanks, Virat. Virat, one quick question around on that same thread, right? I had a view around these IceGate APIs and some of the other unified logistic interface platform, ULIP. I'm sure you're fully on top of it. How technically would people adapt to a ULIP type interface? How do they try and get their way around? What is the value they serve? Because apparently, we did deliver a ULIP recently as well from our own experience. We figured there's a lot of synergy. There's a lot of interaction across this logistics platform and a view into the export market world, if you will, our own exporters, the various entities and the stakeholders. What is your view? Thought I'll probably quiz you a little on that if you are open to it.
I think we'll do it offline. I'm not very sure about this
Okay.
concept. I'll have to understand it better. Yeah.
Basically, it is an integrated platform for the stakeholders to, enhance their efficiency,
Mhm.
utilization of this tech, and reducing the cost of logistics in India and so on.
I think, yeah, I mean, it is good, but in fact, what I was thinking when we were discussing these questions
Right.
was that one area of collaboration which we could have is something which, as a research team, we also feel, that we are doing a lot of secondary research and analysis, data analysis, but stakeholder consultations is something which we could explore jointly, and bring out some questions which are relevant to you, some questions which are relevant to us. And I think from our perspective, it helps us bring exporter issues to the government, so it builds our credibility and also benefits the ecosystem. From your perspective, I think your technology and product development is health.
Yeah,
So I think that is something we can think of, like you are in touch with some industry people, we are
correct.
in touch with them, so we could jointly bring some exporters together and have some comprehensive consultations. So this is something which could help both of us.
I agree. Completely concur.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I mean, their perspective matters
I
in these
agree. I mean, I
questions,
think there's,
not mine, in
I
fact.
totally hear you. I think it's the voice of the customer. Oftentimes, in our discovery and some of the early pilots and into the larger deployments, if you will, when we go to these large enterprises mostly and medium, I would say, one of the common pain areas that we hear time and again is better industry collaboration, better knowledge of what is changing out there in the landscape. Like you said earlier, the queryable and verifiable information at the same time, so as to have that trust marker, if you will, to be abreast of solving for that information asymmetry and having it at the fingertips. Something that are solid use cases for AI, the way I see it, and that's the reason I'm sort of bullish on this vertical. And solving, the top six, like we had discussed last year as well, on the top six categories for India: food, pharma, consumer electronics, apparel, and so on, engineering goods, and so on. Yeah, Usha, back to you.
Yeah, because we are not like actively engaging with all the people in these sectors. We do research, but it is something we want to do.
Correct. Yeah,
We
Right.
definitely want to do that because that also gives us future
agree.
opportunities.
Totally agree.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sir. So,
Right.
on a closing note, let's look at requesting you to both.
We can't
Uh,
hear you. Can we hear?
I can
Can we
I
hear
can
you?
hear.
Usha?
I can hear you.
Acha, you can hear. Great. Great, great. Something wrong with my
Go ahead,
system.
Usha.
Please
I can hear
Okay,
you.
sir. Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So now we have covered a lot of ground, right? From policy disruptions to how the institutionalized support is being given and to the technological solutions. So to Indian exporters that are listening to this, that are operating in a high volume or a high risk environment. So they are dealing with the competitive pressure, technological change, and also the regulatory complexity all at once. So if you have to give them one key message, that's something they could act on and to be better, what would it be? Starting with Virat sir.
Well, one key message would be from my side is to treat exports as a long-term investment and not quick wins over a few deals. It's a commitment.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, Usha. Happy to hear Virat's views. I think it's very, very important that we take a long arc of time view. This is a multi-century industry. This is not something that came run of the mill last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's been existing forever. In fact, the whole genesis of many countries being invaded, us included, at some point in time in the 1700s, the genesis was trade. So trade is a very deep-rooted topic. There is a lot of history. There is a lot of geography, obviously, but there is also a lot of complexity as well in how it is being done today. One message to exporters, manufacturing, and international traders would just be this: that look, guys, we need to look at identifying inefficiencies, making sure that your compliance and regulatory nuances are respected, and making sure that there is the least friction, if you will, in some of these processes. And if as a result technology can help you get there, sure. If as a result, better workflow automation can help you get there, sure. And as a result, then the next level of detailing is where we start saying, can AI agent solve? Can agentic AI do it? And so on and so forth, right? That's really how you should be looking at the workflow, and not really looking at it saying, I'm going to first thrust AI on top of a company or an exporter because I happen to be an AI. That's not how I look at it. I look at it as a customer pain point, working backwards. How can we solve for these big ticket items for them? How can we solve for a century, multi-century vertical, if you will, addressing 90% plus of world trade, and then work backwards. So over to Virat. Virat, I was just chiming in with my views on how I would answer that question. The gist of it was this: it's a century-old problem. Exporters and traders have to acknowledge that uh, it has evolved over many, many, many centuries and not just decades. There are a lot of rooms. There is a lot of room for optimization. There is a lot of room for making sure we identify and root out inefficiencies. There's a lot of room for making trade more human. That's very important. It has to be not just systems and not just paperwork, not just rejections by the port of dispatch and through custom hold agents and your port of entry agents and customs and the various state transition players involved, stakeholders involved, logistics players involved, etc. But it's the whole gamut, and you have to then look at double clicking into that problem and say, how can we see if we can leverage technology? Will it be a needle mover or will it be an inhibitor? And then you work double click and say, is AI having some of the good capabilities, if you will, to help solve my job to be done and my utopian problem and my sub immediate problem? And then can it bring in those efficiencies, time motion, customer experience, better utilization of resources, systemic interactions, automation, workflows, all of that. And then you bring in AI. And that's how I look at the problem as an AI practitioner. Not saying I'm going to throw AI at a problem and just see how it solves that use case, right? So that's really how I look at it. Would probably let Virat chime in for his views.
Yes, sir.
So
Uh,
while Virat joins in, right, I think one of the other dynamics that I want to throw here is it's not just again about only inefficiencies. It's not just about saying I'm going to be able to connect the dots on XYZ. It's also about trying to show ROI. We didn't cover much of it, but I will definitely dwell on that. And Virat is a think tank, right? TPCI represents that capability view. So it's very important to take a look at ROI, consumer experience as well. So that's a very important perspective in how people should be looking at, and the message that I would leave for them. Virat, I was just summarizing my message to them saying ROI, consumer experience, working backwards from customer problem and into technology, not the other way around. Tail wagging the dog. It has to be top down. Yeah,
Right.
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Okay, so moving on, let's close this session with one final question. So, looking ahead to 2025 and 2026, what should the exporters be preparing for? Like, what changes should they be anticipating, or how should they position themselves to survive and even thrive in this trade industry?
Let
Virat,
go
sir?
Virat go. I'll let Virat go first. Yeah.
Yeah.
2025, 26. Your views in this crazy landscape. Yeah.
I'm s- I'm sorry, there's a
That's okay,
huge
Virat. We
problem
can
with
hear
my
you.
internet. I'm
Basically,
just
the
trying to
question was
get into a better location. Just give me a moment.
Yes, sir, sure.
sure. So while
Just a
Virat gets
second.
to his seat, right? One
Yes.
the view was
Let's try
so
here.
yeah, Virat. Just to summarize the question, largely it was about given the macro view where we are today. What is it going to look like in 2025, 26, given all the craziness in our industry that we are seeing today? Our predictions and our recommendations to our exporter groups and trader groups.
I think craziness is not just for us, so it's for everybody. I think
Yeah,
it's a
totally. I'll tell you. I'll put it this way, right? My perspective on what my views and my suggestions would be for our exporters, the community at large. We can hear you. Don't worry. We can hear you.
yes. So as I was saying that, of course, it's a time where the realignments need to be very fast, and I think this kind of scenario does present challenges, but at the same time, it provides an impetus to people to rethink and develop some good solutions which should hold us in good stead for the long term. I think a particular area we would be looking at is how the government looks at VLI 2.0, because uh, it has helped some industries, and I think that's a positive. How can it really be realigned to bring up new uh, companies in these sectors which we recognize are of potential? One thing I would like to put up, which is very positive, because I have been in journalism for quite some time. So there was a time when some of the top telecom companies, when we used to talk to them, they said that it is impossible to make a mobile phone in India. It won't happen, and this is like 10 to 15 years back. But and even I have seen for a long time, the focus was never on exports was seen as something which, there's a surplus in your market, you're serving the domestic market, there's a surplus and you take it to exports. But now I think over the past decade, I think it's very positive that both the government and the private sector are now looking at exports as a genuine strategy, that you're building for export markets. You're not just building for the domestic market and the surplus goes to export. That's not the way you're doing it. It's not that you're making a Maruti car, so okay, all developing countries are your market. No, the approach is that you have the capability to actually serve a developed market today, and you will build a product for that, right? So I think India has changed, India has evolved. That is the positive I'm taking from this. And all I would say to exporters is that Do not see it as a transactional business, see it as a long term business. uh, View it with commitment, be ahead of knowledge always, because international markets are unpredictable, uh, but they are lucrative. See, if the person understands, has the right kind of knowledge, it's also a huge positive to tap an export market. And I think lastly, building brands is something I would keep emphasizing on. There's this D2C channel gives you that opportunity, and some Indian companies have shown that you can actually build brands using D2C in an overseas market, and that builds a kind of competitive advantage which will stay with you for a long term. Indians should now try to move out of that B2B kind of a mentality. B2B is good, but if you have that capability and staying power, you should look at investing in a market. You should look at setting up physical presence.
I agree. And here's my flavor, right? And my thoughts. Again, very well summarized, Virat. And just to add to some of the points that you highlighted, one, don't look at, and you nailed it, don't look at export as just some surplus concept. We have a massive target ahead. I think he touched upon PLI, production linked PLI 2.0, production linked incentive schemes, applicable for many sectors, right? I mean, the ones that have been recent beneficiaries, for example, are consumer electronics, mobile phones, smartphone manufacturers. Look at where we are. Uh, 3 years ago, just to give you a perspective, India was nowhere on the during the pandemic era or just after we were exiting the pandemic. We were nowhere there on the electronics landscape in exports. And today, with Apple coming in, and because of all the China delays and the lags in supply chain that they faced, and the Suez Canal crisis, etc., back then in the pandemic, if you recollect, in 21. Um, Fast forward to today, China plus one, India, Vietnam, and so on, especially India, I'll speak for our country. Uh, huge PLI schemes being put to play and utilized very well by the exporters, claiming the incentives as well and making sure that they're building in India, building for the world. When was the last time you heard many, not just foreign original equipment manufacturers coming in here into India and export, like Apple's one case? Look at homegrown brands. Uh, Tata JLR, though product of an acquisition of Jaguar Land Rover by the Tatas a decade plus ago, but the concept being that we are making for global markets from Indian companies. Tata Motors in this case, Mahindra, exporting for other markets. Ashok Leyland, I've seen Ashok Leyland buses in Mauritius. We see our petroleum giants IOCL and BPCL in Mauritius. Autos, right? So Bajaj Autos in Sri Lanka. So what I mean is, uh, don't look at it like Virat highlighted, and I'm cutting across categories just to give you the breadth of the flavor and the opportunity that it presents. 3 trillion is an easy target for the Indian export markets and traders. That's my message for them by 2030. That's the target laid by DGFT. Although the initial numbers were 2 trillion, I think it's easily going to cross 3 trillion in my optimistic view. Rakuten, the word is optimism in Japanese. The other mood would be PLI 1, yes. Second is, don't constrain what I saw in Aero India in 2025 February, 4 months back, 5 months back, versus what I saw Aero India in 1994. One small hall, some Sea Harrier from Britain, some XYZ company coming in. And it was also B2B back then, by the way, just so you know. To 8 hangars full, all the aircraft moved elsewhere, hangars for display pavilions, right from our homegrown massive BEL, ISRO, HAL, name them, they're all there. Bharat Dynamics, uh, some of the best of the breed, right? Mazgaon Shipyard, the shipbuilding, Cochin Shipworks, and then you go into the foreign players. name it, and that country was there. Australian government delegation, the Israeli delegation, the Americans in big force because the F-35 was on display, Russians, cargo planes, and the manufacturers of the same, Saab, name it. And there were 700 odd SME exporters who had their stalls there, which is a great plus point and a shot in the arm, if you will. SIDM, the Society for Indian Defense Manufacturers, was having a handbook which I bought, and I tried to reach out to them and said, and many were in early stages of exports. But the point that Virat's highlighting is this, right? Make India known, and we proved it less than a month and a half ago. We proved it with the capability that we have, which surpassed many of the most popular. Without getting into geopolitics again, I'll stay away. But largely capabilities in defense, Atmanirbharta, our own Make in India initiatives in that space, defense manufacturing, a huge export sector, food, like Virat said, D2C, move into D2C. Have that Dabur honey being available in an American food store in the middle of Maryland or in the middle of New Jersey, and it's there. It's true, right? Or you get your MTR products ready to eat available there as well, and quality control. And then make sure that it is not just those B2B engagements, but direct to consumer engagements and export markets. Keeping that as your focus, right? Some X percentage of that exports, and not just that. Like I say, right? That I remember this example. I laugh when I think of it. I was in Stanford, Palo Alto, Stanford Mall, Virat. This was way back in 2010, and I was shopping for a shirt, something like this, and I look up the piche, and it says "Made in India." I was like, "Oh wow, this is. I'm proud of this." And then I look up another shirt. It says "Made in Bangladesh." And apparel exports, we're getting a shot in the arm now, thanks to all the regional, again, geopolitical aspects. But we're getting a lot of tailwinds powering us to increase our share of apparel exports as well. But that's the learning, right? So recently we were speaking to some people from the Apparel Export Promotion Council as well, my co-founder Meet and me. But largely that's the learning, that there is so much opportunity, and like Virat said, you got to make it a first-class citizen and build products that are tailor-made for exports, not just some low-cost market. And hence, I will push some Maruti or some other homegrown capability there, but high-end, like the example that I deliberately gave around Jaguar Land Rover, even though it came as a product of an acquisition, or Tata Chorus, which is integrated with Tata Steel today. So that happened way back in 2007, and we proved many an naysayer wrong, if you will. So that's kind of the parting note. I would say, the opportunity is huge. Sky's the limit. Literally so, pun intended. And in especially in the space sector, by the way, space sector, that's a massive sector, by the way. We're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. Food, apparels, consumer electronics, engineering goods, equipment, pharma, huge opportunities.
Thank you all. So, for every Indian exporter listening, we are not just managing shipments, you're building the India's global reputation. So, with the right institutional partnerships and intelligent technology, compliance transforms from cost center to a competitive edge. So, the foundation is set. Now it's time for us all to build. So thank you, Mr. Virat sir and Naveen sir, for this comprehensive look at India's export evolution. So the intersection of promotion, policy, technology, and execution has been very critical, and this has been a Smart Exports 2025. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, Virat. Thank you, Usha, for being a great moderator for the entire session in the podcast. It was very lively, it was very sort of engaging, and I loved my conversation with Virat. Virat, as always, a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time to speak with us on a Friday afternoon and evening. Thank you. Have a nice weekend ahead. Thank you, guys.